we have just completed a cycle of very profound teachings, very deep and very profound, many teachings on the nature of mind, many empowerments and transmissions associated with the nature of mind. And one thing I know for certain about students, particularly my students, but I think students in general, is that we have a realistic absorption level, that once we reach that level, we sort of glaze over and look a little bit like Christmas dinner, just sitting there on the plate. And I suspect that we are close to that level, if not really, really approaching that level, even now. I myself, you can tell, I'm a little off the wall. But that happens. My concern today, however, is to utilize this time effectively to make what I call another glue teaching or cement teaching, kind of fill in the cracks teaching. Not to engage in anything profound or to continue in such a way as to require you to memorize or deeply consider from an intellectual point of view anything that I have to say today. That's not what I'm going to offer today. What I would like to do, however, is to help you to turn your mind or soften your mind or posture your mind in such a way as to assist you in utilizing and in going forward to practice what you have learned recently. And in order to do that, I would like to talk a little bit about devotion. And I would like to talk a little bit about a word that Westerners have a real tough time with, but a word that is foundational, fundamental to our path. And that word is surrender. Now, Westerners don't like that word very much. It's a very difficult word for us. When we first approach the Dharma, we approach the Dharma feeling as though we have traveled so far already. Do you remember what it was like when you first came to the Dharma? You considered yourself a well-traveled spiritual seeker. You considered yourself very knowledgeable and considered that you had certain characteristics and qualities and talents to bring to bear to Dharma. And you thought that this would be a nice addition to what you already knew spiritually. Or perhaps an appropriate next step in that it's very exotic, in that it has all the trimmings and the hallmarks of something that looks very advanced. And so being as wonderful as you were, this is a good next place to go. Actually, that's not the best posture to have when you approach the Dharma. And I have to tell you, from the point of view of honesty, I have seen it all. I have seen people come into this Dharma center where really pure practice happens. Even though I appear very non-traditionally, we practice in a very traditional way and a very pure way. And we practice one step in front of the other. No one gets to leap to high teachings. Everyone has to build a firm foundation. And we have traditional lamas and traditional methods and all of the proper technologies, and everything you see really is according to the book. And that means then, of course, that it comes directly from the mind of the Buddha, who is enlightened. That is enlightened awareness. But yet, I see people, Westerners, come to this place and walk into the room and say, "Oh yeah, this room has got the feeling." And really, they will take their hands and they'll put them all over the crystals and they'll think, yeah, these people are potent. Or they'll have some kind of response like that, indicating that it really mattered, how they considered the Buddha's teaching, or that they really had the qualities to be able to differentiate. I mean, what could possibly happen? What could you do? Could you walk up to a crystal and say, "Oh, I feel the vibes, let's see. Some of them are not practicing their Ngundro effectively." Or, I mean, really, what can you do? What can you accomplish by acting in that way? Yet I see that happen all the time. People feel that they are able to discriminate perhaps better than the Buddha does, as to how people are doing spiritually. And they'll maybe look at what we're doing here and think, Maybe it's too much mantra recitation, or maybe it's too much visualization. Maybe they're too noisy, or maybe they're too quiet, or maybe they're too renounced. Look at these guys, they dress funny. Or maybe they're too unrenounced. Look at her. But everybody's got an opinion, you know? And we come to Dharma prepared and armed with our intellectual opinions. And yet if we have the karma, if we have the virtue in our mind stream, we soon settle down, hopefully. And as we settle down, we begin to realize that in fact, this is a path that not only is promising to lead to supreme realization, but in fact has produced those results again and again and again. Lord Buddha himself produced those results, and so many of those uncountable numbers that he touched through this path that have accomplished this very method have achieved the auspicious result of enlightenment. And it is not something that we guess at. We don't guess that these beings have achieved realization. They have produced results that are visible, that are seeable. They have produced what we call the rainbow body, which is a body that at the time of death transforms itself into a pure energy state, and the body itself can disappear. Or the body itself will become very small. Or the body will die, it will cease to function, not in an ordinary way where one sort of drops dead on the floor, but the person will sit up in full lotus position and recite mantra and then pass in that way. And then during the time of cremation, or whatever method is used to dispose of the body, usually and traditionally it's cremation, the body will produce extraordinary relics that sometimes will pop out of the fire in an extraordinary way. Cannot be ordinary. For instance, I have a bone relic, and I don't say this to brag to you, but I have a bone relic from a Lama who passed and who was a Lama from our lineage. And at the time of his cremation, the fire was extraordinarily hot. And it was able to burn because although it was during the monsoon and rain was all around, in the area of the fire, there was no rain. It was perfectly dry. And yet you could cross just a few feet and there would be rain, a sheet of rain falling down. But his fire burnt beautifully. So the fire was very hot. And everything of his body was cremated thoroughly. The bones, I have the bones, they are extremely charred to the point of ash. Yet his heart remained raw and came out of the fire all by itself. And within the heart there were relics. Now, you cannot accomplish this if you have not accomplished your practice. These are not things that ordinary people will do. These are signs that produce visible result. And surely we know that that Lama will return in some form as to be of extraordinary benefit to sentient beings. There are many stories of different parts of the body that is being consumed with flames, popping out of the fire or disappearing into the air, proving certainly that that Lama achieved the auspicious result and will certainly appear again in order to benefit beings. Many things like that. There are stories of Lamas' bodies that produce pearls, a kind of pearl, as a relic. And I know that this is true because I have some from great Lamas. These pearls are opalescent, they are rounded, they are perfectly beautiful. When looked at in the light, some of them have rainbows inside of them. Their bodies produce that. Quite extraordinary, is it? When's the last time your body produced such a relic? Probably not recently. You can't remember. These are the kinds of results that I count on. When I determine whether or not I myself will follow the Buddha's teachings, these are the kinds of things that I look for. I don't want to follow the teaching of someone who has come up with a theory of spirituality. You know, and that how much has that happened here in the West? There are so many different practices that one can do, aren't there? So many different kinds of systems that one can enter into that produce what result? Sometimes it is a system that has been thought up 20 years ago. Someone's made up a system. So far it has not produced enlightenment. It has not produced definite, understandable result. And so I feel like for me to consider practicing such a practice as that would be like thinking that I have to cross an ocean of suffering, or an ocean, in a boat that I'm not certain is seaworthy. And I'm just not that stupid. That's just how it is. Or sometimes we consider practicing a practice that is not complete, that we can't get all the teachings for. For instance, there are certain forms of esoteric practice that over time have been lost. The original words of the original master have been lost. They are no longer intact. They are no longer really potent, even though the master himself might have been of the greatest. But there's no path. And so in a sense that would be like trying to cross an ocean in a boat that has holes in it. And I'm not that stupid either. So when I decide for myself that I practice the Buddhist teachings, when all of you make that decision, you have to make the decision based on that kind of intelligence. You really shouldn't walk in here and feel the crystals and get the vibes and think this is it for you. I mean, if it gets you in the door, fine, who am I to say? But if you decide you want to practice the Buddhist teaching, you have to practice for a different reason. You have to use your brain. You have to think this through. Because if you come in here and you think, wow, cool place, or looks great to me, or gee, how colorful, or wow, what crystals, or if you have that kind of response, or just that you like the people, I hope all of those things are true. I hope you like all of those things. But that kind of response will not get you through the dry times, and there will be dry times. That kind of response will not cause you to practice diligently every day of your life in order to achieve the supreme result. With that kind of response, you'll have the option of practicing or not practicing, according to whether you feel like it or don't feel like it. On the days that you feel like it and you can get the vibes, you'll practice. But will you practice with understanding? And on the days that you don't feel like it and you just can't get it together and you're not in the mood, you will not practice. No, those are not the reasons to practice. You should practice because you know that you are in fact in an ocean of suffering, and that there is only one cessation of suffering, and Lord Buddha has taught that that cessation of suffering is enlightenment. That is the only end. And we'll be duped. Don't you have great days? Don't you have days that feel fabulous? Don't you have experiences that feel like nothing could be better? This is primo. Don't get fooled. There are no such experiences, because within each one of those experiences is the seed of its end. If it has the beginning, it must end. And anything that has gone up will come down. Anything that is made hot will become cold, and vice versa. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is to be believed according to what we feel. But we are constantly duped by what we feel. If it feels good, we'll do it. And we try to rely on our intuitive capacity. Oh, it felt good to come here, but now it no longer feels good to stay. Well, big deal. What's so impressive about that? That you can feel? You are a sentient being. By definition, that means a feeling being. You will feel hot and you will feel cold, you will feel good, you will feel bad, you will feel holy, you will get the vibes, and then you'll go right straight down and feel like nothing. All of those things are part of your experience. And you know that. So when you practice, you have to practice with intelligence, considering that it will not always feel like the right thing to do. You will not always be in the mood. You will not always want to practice. But one thing I can promise you is at the time of your death, when you get ready to enter into the bardo and the consciousness is about to expel from your body, when you know that according to the teaching you will see the content of your mind stream, you will recognize or not recognize the content of your mind stream, and thereby have whatever experience in bardo you are qualified to experience. At that moment, you will never say, gee, I practiced too much. Or, darn, I wish I hadn't practiced so much. When you realize that all of the emotional experiences and wonderful things that have happened to you, relationships and things that you can have and food that you can eat and places that you can go and adventures that you can engage in, that all of those things that you have collected cannot go with you, cannot enter into the bardo with you, that they are nothing when you enter into the bardo, that they are utterly meaningless, that there is no context by which they can accompany you. And even all the relationships that you put so much energy into, unless that is the relationship with your own root guru, bingo, you go alone into the bardo. And that's how it is. When you experience that at the time of your passing, you will never say, I wish I had yet another pair of red shoes. Or you will never say, I wish I'd had more boyfriends. These are not the things that you will be thinking of. You will be realizing that at the time of your passing, your perception and your direct experience from that perception is naked. Absolutely naked. That what you have accomplished within your own mind stream, the level to which you have purified your perception, the level to which you have understood the nature of your being, your true nature, your primordial wisdom nature, the extent to which you can, the capacity that you have to actually recognize the natural state and become awakened to that state, to that extent, you will achieve realization in the bardo, that you will have success in the bardo. Otherwise, quite frankly, the bardo will be frightening. How is it that the bardo is so frightening? Think about that for a moment, just for a moment. Well, it's like this. Here in our physical environment, there are certain generalized characteristics about our physical environment that are across the board. They are our commonality. They are in a sense, our group karma, if you will. Certain characteristics about this physical realm. And that is that there is a certain lag between cause and effect in the physical realm. Now that lag is a lag of time and experience, and it varies. For some people, due to their karma, there is an enormous, instant karmic ripening. For instance, hasn't this happened to you where you have thought, I really dislike this person. I really don't like this person. In fact, I think this person is a real nerd. I hate this person. I don't like this person. I never want to see this person again. And bingo, you step into a train or something, and there's that person right in your face. Haven't things like that happened to you? And you know, intuitively you know that there is some connection between the things that you said in your mind, the thoughts that you had, and your seeing of that person. Or you have stated categorically that you would never do something again, no matter what. That it was non-virtuous, and you're finished with all that, you'll never do it again, and you really don't see why other people still do things like that. And within 2 weeks, you're back in the saddle again. We've all had experiences like that. And they've made us eat crow. We've seen things ripen. We've seen experiences where we have taken from a person, and then the karma for that has ripened, and we have needed something from that same person, and they have not been able to return to us, to give us what we've needed. It can happen very quickly. Unfortunately, we get duped by karma in that often it does not ripen quickly. It can take 2 weeks, and then we forget. We have very small memories. Or it can take a year, or it can take 10 years, or it can take 20 years, or it can take 10 lifetimes, or it can take 100 lifetimes. And of course, under those conditions, we have no memory of anything that has passed before. So we have no sense that cause and effect relationships are infallible, that they absolutely work out perfectly. We have no sense of that. And so having no sense of that, we have no sense as to how we should conduct ourselves, as to how we should practice. And we have no real sense of the limitations or the problems associated with cyclic existence. But in the bardo, that isn't true. In the bardo, once karma ripens immediately. Do you realize that? In the bardo, if one comes to the state of cognition, or the state of appearance, which is one of the steps in Bardo. At that point, the content of one's mind stream is displayed like a movie on a projector. But it's like a hologram more than a projector in that we are there. We know that we are not looking at a movie. It seems to us very real. So that if within our mind stream we have a great deal of selfishness, that selfishness will ripen as some kind of bone-crushing desire that will sweep us away and render us impotent to do anything other than respond with desire. Or if we have a great deal of hatred within our mind stream, that hatred actually appears as some frightening, wrathful deity, some horribly frightening, wrathful deity in some form with fangs and horrible characteristics that we will respond to with fear and shirk away from, not understanding that in fact this is an emanation of our own mind and our own qualities, and therefore, if that is true, must also have the innate nature of Buddhahood, as our own mind does. We will respond instead with fear, rather than recognizing our mind and moving toward our true primordial wisdom nature, awakening to that. And that, of course, is the suffering of the Bardo. These are the things that we have to prepare for intelligently. To not prepare for these intelligently is like knowing that eventually you have to go through a room that is littered with furniture and littered with obstacles, things that are sharp and pointed and perhaps could produce injury, things that are all over the floor, uncountable, insurmountable obstacles, and thinking that because it is a frightening thing to do, or an effortful thing to do, I should say, thinking that we should go through that room with our eyes closed and the lights off. Don't you think that would be stupid? I mean, would you try to do that really? If you knew that there were knives and furniture and sharp objects in a room, would you try to go through that room knowing that you had to go through that room with your eyes closed, with the lights off? Would you? Answer. You know. Of course not. You would never do something like that. Then why would you consider it intelligent to go through the Bardo, which is the same, with your eyes closed and with no practice, armed with no awareness of your own nature? What is turning on the light? Turning on the light is recognizing your own primordial wisdom nature, and that can only be done by purifying the mind stream of hatred, greed, and ignorance, jealousy, pride, and what's the other one? Huh? Delusion, right, thank you. 5 out of 6 isn't bad. That's the only way, really, to prepare yourself for entering into the Bardo, is to purify the mind stream. And through the practice, begin to become familiar with one's own nature demonstrated or manifested as the primordial wisdom beings, as these meditational deities, in both their peaceful and wrathful forms. But mostly to learn to abide spontaneously in one's own true nature, so that when the elements dissolve, so that when the body actually lets go and the consciousness leaves the body, when it actually begins to move through the Bardo experience, actually that's not a good way to put it, but when it actually begins to experience its own display, which is probably a better way to put it, there must be some competence in recognizing the true underlying nature and to reside effortlessly within that recognition. If one does not accomplish that practice to some degree, then one will not understand what occurs. There will be no recognition at that time. On the other hand, if one has practiced that way, then at the time of one's death, the recognition will be so deep and so real, so profound. It will be not different from the way a child always recognizes its mother in a crowd. A child that has been with its mother always. With that deep kind of recognition, and that easily, it can occur. But only if one practices. You shouldn't kid yourself about that. It isn't enough just to hear the teaching. It isn't enough to talk about being a spiritual person, and it surely is not enough to come in here and feel the vibes. One really has to practice. One really has to accomplish Dharma in order to achieve the same results as the other lamas have achieved themselves, and also that they have promised us. How can we know? How can we know what to do if left to our own resources? Look at the choices that we've made thus far in our lives. I mean, look at our lives. It's pretty much a mixed bag of tricks. We've made some good choices, and we've made some bad choices. And we have made choices that we've suffered for. And I know Frank Sinatra came out with a song, I Did It My Way. And his idea was that so long as I was willing to take and eat whatever I made, it was okay to make it. Well, that's crazy. And you know that's crazy. Because he hasn't eaten a half of what he's about to eat. He hasn't even scratched the surface of his dinner. And you have to think of that karma ripening in a very long way. And you have to be skillful in accomplishing your life in such a way so that it is a benefit to you and a purification rather than something you have to return again and again and again and only to experience the karma from. Every moment of our lives now, we are creating causes. What are the thoughts you're having in your mind right now? I can almost hear them. Some of you are receiving the teachings very well, and some not. Those of you that are filled with judgment and a kind of tightness inside of you, do you realize that even at this moment you are creating causes? Causes that you yourself and no one else will have to experience. You're the one that has to experience them, no one else. And you should think that what you are hearing now, although maybe there's some room for delusion in that, I'm a very ordinary woman and I'm teaching you these things in a very ordinary way. Still, these are the teachings of the Buddha. These are the teachings that arise from the mind of enlightenment. These are the Buddha's teachings. And to pull oneself away from them, to react against them, creates causes that you may not want to live with. So try, when you hear them, to make several decisions. To understand, first of all, that if you have the karma to hear these teachings, it's a karma that you want to build on. That if you have the karma to have the option to practice, it is a karma that you must act on. That if you have the karma to feel love and compassion, if you can hear these words, then it's a karma that you want to live by for the rest of your life. And that if somehow, through some virtue that you have accumulated in the past, you have the ability to understand something of the moment of death and therefore prepare for it, then do so by all means. Do so. And if you have the karma to hear some of the teachings that we have heard recently, this enormous cycle of teachings and their great profundity, surrender. Surrender your mind to understanding, meaning that you should examine the content of your life. And here's where it all pulls together for those of you that have really heard these teachings and have had the great virtue and benefit. All that I've said today is about surrender. Everything that I've said, whether you've heard it or not, is about surrendering from the depth of your heart. Like I've said, Westerners have a great deal of intellectual arrogance. They have a real tough time with this. But when you receive a teaching of great potency, you have to take the time to examine every part of your life. Even the things that in our society we condone, the things having to do with family, for instance, the things having to do with approval, the things having to do with the regard of one's friends, the things having to do with any institution associated with our society that one becomes dignified by. We have to think how much we cling to those, and we have to think also, what is the fruit of these things? I love my family, but I know that my family cannot bring me to enlightenment. I know that my practice has to come first. I love the love and approval of my friends as much as anyone else, but I know that my friends will not accompany me into the bardo. And I know that it's good to be successful. I know it's good to be rich. I know it's good to be popular. I know it's good to be attractive. I know all of these things. But if I follow all of these things through, they will not give me the most auspicious result. And so in my mind, I feel that I must surrender completely to those causes in my life which will produce the ultimate result. Not because it's emotionally magnificent to surrender, but because it's smart. And one has to be practical about these things. In that sense, that kind of surrender is a very practical idea. One should surrender to one's teacher. Who else but one's guru can accompany one through the bardo? One has to surrender utterly and completely, holding nothing to oneself. One should never say, I'll give my guru this much and my friends this much, or my family this much. It should never be like that. Because if it's like that, what have you got? What do you have? What will the friends and family actually do for you? Actually, you should be doing what the children are doing. You should be thinking, how can I accomplish my practice so that I can return again and again and again for their sake? It's you who have the samaya of benefiting them. Can you do it as an ordinary sentient being that clings to them because you were taught to do so for stupid reasons? Or shouldn't you accomplish your practice and know that when you look your children in the eye and say to them, I will never abandon you, there's some muscle behind that. You can mean that. None of us can say that. We can't look at our children, we can't look at our parents, we can't look at our lovers, we can't ever say to them, I will never leave you, because we will all die and not know how to help them through that. On the other hand, if we promise to return again and again and again to benefit sentient beings, they can count on us, and we'll be there for them. These are the things that we have to consider, and these are the things that we have to surrender to. They're not the same as what our society has taught us. They're really not the same as what other religions have taught us, actually. They're not the same as what our parents have taught us. My mother told me to marry a Jewish doctor. They're rich. And they're good to their wives. That's what she said. She ought to know. She didn't marry one. So these are not the values that we grow up with. But these are the values that the Buddha teaches. And they are potent. They are life-changing. And we should surrender to them utterly. Because really, in truth, there is nothing else of any real value in cyclic existence. Think it through. There are millions of things that you are still clinging to. What are they? Isolate them. Follow them through. What will they bring you? And ultimately, will you be empowered? Will you be able to return in order to benefit the very ones or situations that you cling to in a real way? Therefore, surrender to your practice. Surrender to those pure lamas that can actually bring you the path in such a way that is palatable to you and that will actually cut through, will reach you to the core of your being. Surrender utterly. And the first thing that can go in your surrender is the intellectual arrogance that causes us to dislike that word. Of all the words that one can practice, it is by far the most beautiful and most profound. So think in that way. Think of the value of sentient beings. Think that although we are all equal, and the Buddha teaches that we are all equal, there are many of them and only one of us. And surrender to that as well. Think of their well-being. So I hope you take these thoughts and use them as ways to continue your practice with what you've learned during this cycle of teaching. And for those of you that are new, I hope it wasn't too much to swallow all at one time. But if you really practice surrender, it'll go down easy. Nanda
Sure.